Welcome to the second recording in MetaLib and your resources, configuring CKV resources. Here you can see the types of resources that are routinely found in MetaLib. Let's take a look at searching and linking in MetaLib's user interface before looking at how to configure resources for search in the management interface. I'm going to use the Find Database module to look for a single resource in MetaLib, PubMed. First, let's look at linking in MetaLib. You can see here that the name of the resource is linked. This link in MetaLib is called the link to the native interface, or the link to the database homepage. This link functions exactly like your current links on your database pages. If I click the link, you can see that I go to the main page for PubMed. If I click the search icon here, I will search PubMed through MetaLib. This search goes to PubMed's search gateway instead of to the main web page. Let's log in to the MetaLib management interface and look at PubMed there. On the left side of the management interface are links relating to resource management, and on the right side are links relating to other aspects of MetaLib administration. I'm going to click on Find a Resource. All resources from the central knowledge base come into MetaLib with the status of inactive. This means they will not be visible to users until you activate them. We know that PubMed was visible in MetaLib, so we know that it is already active. The default in Find a Resource is to search for active resources, so we can search for PubMed here. In this view, you can see the two linked records we discussed earlier. Everything to the left of status is the IRD record. Everything to the right is the configuration record. Next, I want to open up the resource and look at the IRD fields that affect searching and linking. You can open the resource with the S tab. The S tab opens up the subscription tab of the IRD record. You can see that the IRD record contains multiple tabs and fields. Here is the link to the native interface, or the link to the database homepage. In general, these links should match the links you use in your current database list. Below, you can see three key fields that affect searching in MetaLib. The hostname port tells MetaLib where to send the search. You can see that the search for PubMed is going to a very different place than the link to the native interface. It is going to PubMed's XML gateway. The database code field is used for some vendors and not for others. It is not needed for some resources, but as you can see, it is used for PubMed. The authentication field is where you would put a username and password for resources that require them. PubMed is free and does not require authentication. You can check the accuracy of these three fields using the question mark in the upper left. The question mark contains configuration notes from the Libris CKB team. It is how we communicate with you whatever we know about searching this resource. It is always a good idea to check the key searching fields against the question mark for every resource. This is because resources and their requirements may change over time. The configuration notes change with every CKB update and should always be up to date. Your IRD records, however, do not change after the first download. They belong to you, and your changes are never overwritten by the CKB update. Because databases may change over time, but the IRDs that are downloaded do not change without action from you, it is good practice to check the CKB resource against the question mark. In this case, the IRD matches the configuration notes, so we can close this window. Let's look at the workflow for setting up a new free resource that is not already active in MetaLib. In this case, we will look at a resource called Wiley InterScience. Wiley is a journal and database publisher, so why do I call this a free resource? Many resources in MetaLib are free to search, meaning that anyone can run a search and retrieve citations without charge. Wiley charges for full-text access to journal articles, but not for citations and abstracts. MetaLib only retrieves citations and abstracts, so MetaLib can search Wiley InterScience without charge. However, when the user tries to reach full text at the vendor web page, Wiley will require some kind of authentication for full text. Wiley InterScience is not yet active in MetaLib, so I must change the radio button to either search for inactive resources or all resources. I generally prefer all resources. As you can see, Wiley has a large number of search options for their databases. Let's focus on Wiley InterScience journals for this example. First, I'm going to change the status of the database to active. Next, I'll open the database using the S tab, and I'll check the key fields needed for searching and linking. The link to native interface field should match my database list. The hostname port and database code fields should match the configuration notes under the question mark. Since this is a free-to-search resource, the authentication field is blank. Next, let's look at setting up a subscription resource in MetaLib. When a resource is subscription in MetaLib, it means that the vendor requires some authentication from the MetaLib server before MetaLib will be allowed to search. Setting up a subscription resource requires some work with the vendor. You will need to register the IP of your MetaLib server, or get a username and password, or both, before you start. Let's look at a Z3950 resource, Art Abstracts. Again, when searching for a new resource, I need to remember to change the default radio button from active to all resources, since the resource is not yet active in MetaLib. As you can see, Art Abstracts is carried by multiple vendors. Make sure to choose the vendor through which you subscribe. In this case, I subscribe through EBSCO. Let's look at the S tab to look at the key fields for searching and linking. The link to the native interface in this case is going to a very general URL. I will want to change that to the specific URL I'm using for this database on my databases page. The hostname port is going to a Z3950 server, and the database code is already filled in to specify the database code for art abstracts. Let's check these fields against the configuration notes under the question mark. Here you can see a problem. The hostname port in the IRD does not match the hostname port in the configuration notes. This is because EBSCO changed the location of their Z3950 server fairly recently. The change happened after the MetaLib installation on my server, so the old hostname port is still in place. I'll correct the hostname port. There is one final piece of data missing, the username and password I received from EBSCO, so I'll fill that in now and save. You should always remember to test a database in the user interface before releasing it to users. If you want to hide the database from users until you have tested it, we have a test status. This will be covered in the next recording. Let's take a look to see whether Art Abstracts is searching correctly in the user interface. As you can see, Art Abstracts is searching. Let's review setting up CKB resources. In order to set up CKB resources, you want to activate the resource, review the link to the native interface, check the hostname and port against the configuration notes under the question mark. The database code should be provided by the CKB when it is needed, and enter a username password if needed. As you can see, only a few fields in the IRD are necessary for linking and federated search. In the next lesson, we'll look at other fields in the IRD. This concludes the lesson on configuring CKB resources.